This is another CQ Blind Hams podcast.
Welcome everyone to CQ Blind Hams Roundtable. We're doing a follow-up on the Open GD77 project, and we'll with my co-host Russ. My name is Joel, W0CAS, and located in East Tennessee. And over to you, Russ.
Hi, this is Russ, KN4MLR, and I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. So back to you, Joel.
All right, and today's guest is Ian Spencer. Let me get his call sign, DJ0HF, and you're over in Germany.
Yes, I certainly am. Yes, the name's Ian, and I'm located near Cologne here in Germany. My German call is Delta Juliet 0 Hotel Fox, a really nice suffix. And I also have an English call, Golf 3 Uniform Lima Oscar.
Oh, good. And our other guest today is Gena, M0EBP. I got it, Gena. Welcome.
Hi,
where are you from?
Sorry, Joe. Hi, everybody. I'm Gena, M0 Echo Bravo Papa, and I'm in the UK, in Preston, Lancashire. That's the northwest of England.
Oh, great. We had a little humming on somebody's mic. That might have been yours, Gena, but I'm not sure. So what we're going to do now is proceed with our questions that we have. The first one is, we'll pass it out to Ian. Why the GD77? Why do you think the GD77 happens to be the lucky radio that this great project was started with?
Okay, I could say it's the best radio, but maybe it's the cheapest. But the project actually started a long time ago, and it wasn't with Roger, who's done most of the late development. It was with a guy called Kai, who's a German amateur. His call sign Delta Golf 4 Kilo Lima Uniform, and he chose the GD77 because there was a lot of information about the microprocessor it uses and some of the other chips, which meant it was easier to get into it, because the first thing that had to be done was everyone had to find out how the GD77 worked, and that meant decompiling the whole firmware. Now that's really, really difficult, because after you've decompiled firmware or software, you end up with millions of instructions, but you have no idea what they do. And so you see the firmware sending a value to the vocoder, like 120 or something, but you've got no idea why or what it's doing. And so it took a long, long time to sort that out. And the project sort of gradually developed, because Open GD77 isn't a modified Radio Odyssey firmware. It is completely new firmware written from scratch.
Wow, that's amazing that they went to those efforts to be able to reverse engineer the firmware and be able to make it work and work as well as it did. Okay, Russ, you have a question?
This one's for both Gena and Ian. If you could give us a little bit of a background, your individual backgrounds, what type of work that you did or are currently doing, and maybe a little description of your equipment that you're using, that would kind of fill it in for us. So Gena, let's start with you this time.
I had an interest in radio from my school days, really, but didn't get to play radio that much. I started my work life in manual work, working in the factory. Most of my family come from the leather industry. Being born in Northampton is renowned for its shoes, or used to be, and so my family come from a shoemaking background. I've never worked in the shoe industry, but I did work in light engineering, and I found myself in sheltered workshop packing soap, and really got rather frustrated with that, and thought there had to be more to do with life than packing soap. So I undertook a evening class and studied sociology, and managed that quite well. I had the right support from the tutor who read material for me onto cassette tape back in those days. This was 1988, and So I, after getting that qualification, I went to Loughborough Vocational College, which is run by the Royal National Institute for the Blind. And that's where I got to learn how to use a computer with HAL 4 and the Dolphin speech synthesizer, which really sounds like, if you haven't heard one, sounds like eSpeak, very much like that. But in the early 1990, that was, you know, it was the thing. And so I was taught how to use DOS and WordPerfect and Database 3 and that sort of thing. So my interest with computing took up from there. And then, of course, it progressed on to Windows, and I self-taught myself Windows. From the vocational college, I went to a my local mainstream college, and did a business and finance course, which gave me then the qualifications to go to university. I'd studied counselling as an evening class as well, and thought I'd like to learn more about psychology. So I graduated with an applied psychology degree, and my final project was on suicidality, self-harming behaviours and depression, and exploring the correlations between those. So back in the late 90s, this was a sort of interest. Well, to some extent still is, but I think the correlations are fully understood from more recent research. And then since then, I've had one job where I designed a research project to see how disabled people fared with services for, shall we say, mature adults. It was around accessing sexual health information, that sort of thing. So
okay.
I set up a research project on doing that. And I think that's really it. Most of the time, I just sat at home playing computers. I did try to do a degree in computing and software engineering, rather. And I flew through the first year. Then the second year, when it came on to working with graphical user interfaces, things got rather difficult. The software that they were using wasn't accessible. One of the main things was they did research where they used a circuit board with LEDs on it and got the students to compile code so that the lights lit up on this circuit board in a particular sequence. They are hooked up, obviously, to the serial port. And they worked on getting different bleeps to make for me. And they hadn't really researched that I couldn't even access the software. It just wasn't, there was nothing there, no scripting. Even JAWS scripters couldn't write in a script so that I could actually write the code and use this software to make my board bleep or buzz in my case. So I had to leave that course, and I stayed away from coding or any scripting or anything like that. It's only sort of recently that I've started looking into that, but it didn't have not my confidence. So yeah, I think that's enough about me.
All right, yeah, that's very fascinating history you have there, Gena, from your entry level into the work, and then going through all your you guys must have a you said a college or university for visually impaired. That's something the United States really needs. We need a central college that we can send, when blind people graduate high school, you could send them to just a college and have several vocations set up and let them learn. Or us, I wasn't available. We had to go to a normal college if we went to college. But that's very fascinating that you have a college in the UK specifically the visually impaired. Okay, Ian, let's hear your work background. Seems like you're in the computer field from way back.
Way back. Yeah, for me, everything started back in the 1950s, really, or the mid-50s. Are you hearing me okay?
Sounds great.
Oh, okay. It's the mid-50s. I was 8 years old, and I got interested in tuning around on my parents' radio receiver, and I heard people talking to each other. And what I later learned was the 40-meter band. And an uncle explained to me that these were radio amateurs and that they had their own transmitters and could talk around the world. And it blew my mind. I mean, it was the mid-1950s. I was 8 years old. Most people didn't even have a telephone, and these people had transmitters and were talking around the world. I knew from that moment on I wanted to be a radio amateur. And it also shaped the whole of the rest of my life, because when I got to 15, I was becoming extremely frustrated at school. I wasn't learning what I wanted to learn, which was basically electronics and radio. And I told my parents I was going to leave school. They were not happy, as you can guess. But they said to me, because I was obviously very insistent, if you can get a good apprenticeship, then we'll allow you to leave. And I managed to get an apprenticeship with International Telegraphs. And that's one of the biggest communication companies in the world at that time, in London. And they let me leave, and I trained with them. And I learned to send Morse at high speed. At the time, I could manage 40-odd words a minute. Today, not so much. And I learned to touch type. And I then worked in their control room in London. And it was interesting. We talked to engineers all around the world using teleprinters. But we talked to our receiving stations in the UK, and we had quite a few of them, with Morse. Morse was a much more efficient system than you might think, because each of the receiving stations used a different audio tone. So I could be talking to the receiving station in Brentwood and hear at the same time, for example, that Somerton had a problem, and I could then switch to Somerton, something you couldn't do if you were using a teleprinter, because I could actually be watching or listening to three different things at the same time. And gradually, I moved away from the control room, more into electronic switching and then computers. And in 1970, I went to work for Honeywell Information Systems, a good American company, teaching hardware and software at their international school in London. And the German part of the firm used to bring me over to Germany when they had problems. They'd say to the customer, we're bringing a specialist from England. I wasn't always the specialist, but it was cheaper to bring me from England than it was to bring somebody from America. And in 1974, the German part of the company asked if I'd be prepared to come and work for them full-time. And we did. And originally it was sort of planned for maybe 3 to 5 years, but we've now been in Germany for 46 years. So
wow.
You know, we're really settled. And I stayed with the company, but the company changed. A French company, Bull, bought shares in the whole company, and eventually Bull took it over. So I ended up working for a French company, not an American one. And I went from teaching to being training method specialist. And then I went on from that to lead a product development group. And then I became the support manager for Germany for micros and communications. And the last few years before I left the company, I was responsible for technical purchasing. But I'm now retired. And so I'm enjoying a much more leisurely life as a retiree.
Playing radio, enjoying it. That's great. What do you have in your station as far as HTs, mobiles, HF rigs? You want to, Gena, you want to try to answer this one and see how your audio sounded?
Okay, what I have in my shack, I own a TS2000, but it mainly stays packed away in a box because I only have a Diamond V2000 up on the roof, and I don't have any space to put any HF antennas up. I obviously have the GD77 and a little bit of a redundant GD77S. I have a ICOM E90 handy, and I actually also have a Yaesu 450D, but again, because it's a HF radio, that stays packed away really. So not much of a shack here at this end.
No. What kind of hotspot? Do you have a hotspot?
Open spot 2, and I do also just recently took delivery of another jumbo spot, because I want to be able to use access some of the Phoenix repeaters and things here on a different network. So have me hotspot on for Brandmeister talk groups, and the Pi-Star on DMR Plus, etc.
That's good. I have a open spot too, and a homemade Pi-Star built on a Raspberry Pi 3, and they work great. So you're going to enjoy that. Okay, Ian, what do you have in your station? I believe we.
Okay, here I've got an Elecraft KX3, which feeds a small amplifier, and that's the main station. Also, I have a quite long in the tooth Yaesu FT847. The truth is, the receiver in the KX3, it is better than the 847, but I love the 847. I mean, it's such a versatile rig, and it covers just about everything, and it's got lots of buttons, which makes it a lot of fun to use. And so I've got those two as the main rigs. And then, of course, I've got handies like the Radio Odyssey GD77 for obvious reasons. And also I've got a Retavis RT3, which is like the ND380. I don't do much VHF, UHF, except for DMR. And I've got a jumbo spot, which I use mainly. And I've also got much older a DV4 Mini, which is running with the new MMDVM firmware. And so that's quite useful too. So I quite often use the DV4 Mini to monitor one network and the jumbo spot to monitor another.
Oh, that's great. All right, Russ, you have a question for me?
Let's see, the next one up, I just reworded a little bit, but now that you've made quite a bit of progress and contributions over the past month or so, if you had to do over again, would you jump back into this bag of worms, or would you take a pass on it? Gena, what have been your experiences over the past few months with working with this project?
For me, it's actually fitted in quite nicely with lockdown and things, and just having a focus, it's been brilliant for me. Maybe Ian would see things slightly differently, because I did put a lot of pressure upon him at times, but no, it gave me a focus, and so I much enjoyed it. And would I do it again? Most certainly.
Okay, very good. I'm glad to hear that. Ian, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I'd like to think that I'd say yes, I'll do it all again in a heartbeat. Actually, it was a lot of hard work, and there were times near the beginning when I wasn't even sure it was going to be successful, because I wanted to not just make the Radio Odyssey GD77 usable by blind ham. I wanted to empower blind hams to be able to do everything themselves. That means install the software, upload the firmware, upload the voice prompts, create a code plug. And creating a code plug, some sighted amateurs have problems with that. And then uploading the code plug, of course, and then actually using the radio. And to do that, everything had to be very, very detailed. And I'm a sighted person, which means that my right hand is welded to the mouse. Okay. And so suddenly I was in a world where I had no monitor and no mouse. And in fact, one amateur said to me, "You're a sighted person. You can't possibly know what a blind ham needs." And he might have been right, but I had a secret weapon, and that was Gena.
Good job.
Yeah. And so I'd be struggling with NVDA and narrator, and I'd send an email to Gena and say, "Look, it seems to work like this," and she'd say, "Yes, it does, but there's a better way," you know. Or I'd say, "I can't get it to do this at all," and Gena would say, "Yeah, if we do this." And I gradually managed to graduate from absolutely hopeless at screen readers to being sort of beginner level. And sometimes, of course, we hit a brick wall. Sometimes we reached something where it didn't matter which screen reader you used, you couldn't get it to work. And I didn't want to use JAWS and scripts, even though even there some of it wouldn't work. I wanted it to work with every screen reader. That means narrator, NVDA, JAWS. And so I'd have to go back to Roger and say, Roger, this is impossible for a blind ham. This cannot work. Can you do this? And he was great. He then put extra things into the CPS. And so we managed to get past that brick wall, and then we motored on until we hit the next brick wall. But we got there in the end.
Wow, and it's been a great project, and we're so thankful. And you might not ever know. Well, you could possibly know how many people, and I'll ask that question later. But there was a major release update on the 20th of June, and I was going to ask if you could give just a few of the new features that were released in that update, and we have a little minor update this weekend, and maybe you can mention a couple of things that happened then.
Yes, sure, Joel, no problem. The initial update, the initial release was on the 10th of June, and it was an initial release. It worked. All the instructions were there to install everything, but it was only voicing the talk groups and the channels basically. And then there was an update on the 13th where we brought in the voicing for all of the menu, or nearly all of the menu items. And that's the way it stayed until the 20th, because what we then had was a package which worked. You could install everything, you could upload your code plug, you could use it on DMR, use it on FM, everything was working. But it was a little bit restricted. You could only have one zone and only have one talk group list, which for many people would be more than enough, because you only, as you know, you only need one channel for each repeater. And so it's not a problem. But I knew that some people would like to have the DMR channels in one zone, maybe the analog channels in another zone. And so on the 20th, we released a new version which had a lot more support in the CPS to allow people to create multiple zones and multiple talk group lists. That was the major, and also the voicing was changed, so there were 3 different levels. You could have a level where it only did the voicing if you press the button. Another one called follow on, which meant if you press one button after another, it would automatically switch to the new button. And the third one, it voices everything all the time. And so you could choose whichever one you felt most comfortable with. And
That's
then
my favorite.
Yeah, I know, for quite a lot of people. So we didn't expect that, because it was actually requested by a sighted person, but that's the way it works out. On the 23rd, I'd found a problem on NVDA and JAWS that inserting new zones was a problem. I could get around it by telling people to hit the insert button twice, but I asked Roger if he could add a new hotkey sequence, that is Control and letter I, to insert a zone and a talk group list, and he did that, and I released that on the 23rd, and that solved the problem completely. So we then had hopefully a full working package. But of course, Roger never sleeps. He works 24 hours a day. On the 27th, I released another update package, and mostly it's just small bug corrections, but there was one added feature. A lot of people have enjoyed using the last heard. If you hold the blue button, the bottom button on the left hand side, and hit the 3 key, then it will voice last heard. So the stations which have been heard since you last switched the radio on. And each time you press the arrow down and then the SK1 button, that's the middle button on the left hand side, it will voice the next last heard with the talk group and how long ago it was heard. And if you'd like to speak to that person, if you then hit the green menu OK button, it will set up a private call to that person. So when you press the PTT, you'll be putting out a call not to a talk group but to that individual person, and so you're making what's called a private call. I don't know how many people are going to use that, but that's what it does.
Wow. Yeah, that feature I haven't heard about. That'd be pretty cool. Russ, what's your next question? I think you're next in line.
But almost from the beginning of this conversation, everything seems to be going to Roger Clark, and I've always never been one to want to put all my eggs in one basket. What happens if Roger Clark were to say, "I'm done with this"?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Roger is a very important person in the project, as Kai was when it all started, of course. And it would be a major blow if he left the project. That said, the version that we've got now, not just for blind hams, but the version we've got now is really good. I mean, it's got loads of functionality. And if we had to live with that for the rest of the life of the GD77, I think most people will be quite happy. That said, changes are made and improvements are made, and there are still bugs in the firmware. It's not completely bug free, but Roger is not working completely alone. Although I don't normally contribute to the firmware as such, I leave it for Roger to do. I do understand how a lot of the firmware works. I was a programmer, and there are others. For example, Daniel F1RMB has done a lot of work on the other versions, like the RD5R version and the DM1801, and understands exactly how it all works. But there are others. There's the EW1EDG, Dimitri, I think his name is. There's G4EML, Colin. There's DL4LEX, Alex. There are a number of people that have contributed and could contribute or continue contributing if something happened. But we're never actually going to let Roger go. He's chained to the desk.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, that is somewhat comforting. So let's see if we can pause it just for a second.
Can I just ask? Is my audio okay? Because I'm on DSL.
Sounds good.
Yes,
Okay.
It sounds very good. Joel, what?
Yeah, I was just wondering if Radiodity did any contributing to the project, or has they voiced any interest in it?
There's one answer to that one, and that's no. In the very early days, when the group were writing the new CPS, someone from Radio Odyssey contacted them, seemed to be more worried that they were stealing the CPS, but they weren't, because the whole thing, the CPS, although it looks like the Radio Odyssey one, it isn't. It's been completely written from scratch, and of course the firmware has all been written from scratch. But other than that, Radio Odyssey has shown no interest.
Joel, you have a question about the squelch, which I think it'd probably be better if you could explain that one than me. You want to go ahead with that one?
Yeah, we've had some guys saying that they go through the menu and they try to adjust the squelch from the menu and it doesn't work. Have you found that to be an issue, or have you heard anyone else that has that? And then one guy figured a workaround when you're in an analog channel like a simplex and you want to adjust the squelch. If you just hit the right and left arrow key, it raises and lowers the squelch. Have you noticed that, Ian?
Okay, I can say something about that. I have to admit there's a bug in the firmware, okay? You can use the squelch. The way it works is, in the menus, there's a squelch setting for VHF, for 220 megahertz, and another one for UHF. And they're normally set at 45%, which is mostly fine. You can always use the left and right arrow keys when you're in FM mode to reduce or increase the squelch level. So that's always there. But when you switch to a channel, it always takes the default from that 45% that's in the menus. Now, you can go into the menus and you can change the squelch to anything you want, and that will become the new default. But there's a bug. It works providing you're in the first zone. If you're in the first zone, then you can, for example, turn the squelch down to 20%, and from then on, it will work everywhere. I can demonstrate it for you if you like. I'll turn it on.
Sure.
I'm now going to put the radio into FM mode, and you don't hear anything because the squelch is at 45%. And I'm now going into the menus.
Menu, zone, line channel, display options.
And I'm going to options. And
allow to put UHF squelch
and
4, 5%.
And I'm going to UHF squelch. I'll do VHF.
Squelch
I've got
4, 5%.
I've gone to VHF squelch. Now I'm going to reduce that to 0.
VHF squelch 0%.
Now I'm holding the blue button and hitting green to store this value. And nothing appears to have happened at the moment. But if I go to an analog channel.
Menu, zone, A.
Yeah.
I'm on 0. I'm on 0%. Okay, and it's now set at 0%. So all the analog channels on VHF will all be without squelch. And if I press the right arrow button, and I've now squelched it. Yeah, I'm up to about 30%. So you can do it if you're in FM mode and you're on the first zone. If you change the squelch level and then hold the blue button, SK2, the bottom button on the left-hand side, and hit the green out key, it will save that new squelch setting, and it will then work on all zones. But if you try to do it when you're on the second zone, then it doesn't work at the moment. There is a bug.
But if you do it on the first zone and you go to the second zone, it goes back to the default, or does it use?
It then uses your new default. So if you set
it in zone 1, got it.
You set it in zone 1, then it will be used everywhere.
Good deal.
But it is a bug. Yeah.
Well,
or it's a feature. It's a feature.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Ian, you mentioned something in your explanation there that I saw come up on the blind hams mailing list, and that was the 220 megahertz range or band. Does the 77 operate at on that band?
It does. It's not as sensitive as it is on 430 and 144. So you need a relatively good signal from your 220 repeater. And the power levels are not properly calibrated. So, you know, if you think you're getting 5 watts, you may be getting 2 watts, okay? But it does work.
Okay. Do you have a feel for how many times your package, the package being the firmware, the CPS, and the voice packs, how many times you've they've been downloaded from your site?
Yeah, I looked a couple of days ago, or yesterday, I think, actually. I wrote a program a long time ago to analyze the traffic on my website. And it told me then that there have been just over 1,000 accesses to the web page. Yeah. And over 600 downloads. Okay. In fact, 680, I think it said downloads. Obviously, that's not 680 different people, because people have downloaded one version, then the next version, and so on. My guess is we're at around 150 or so.
That's pretty incredible.
That's still a lot. That's a great number for
Yeah, I mean, for the blind community, and then for just one radio, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's not just the UK and America either. There've been quite a lot of downloads from France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and also, I think I said the other day, a couple from Japan.
No, very good. An international effort. Joel, go ahead with your next question.
It came up the other day. Can someone, when they're out in the field and they create a channel, can they name it from the front panel using an alphabetical, like the old cell phones?
The answer to that is yes. But the longer answer is I'm not sure it's a good idea. Let me just try and do it for you to give you a flavour of what the problem is. One moment, I just have to get back to something I can change easily. So I've got here a channel called New.
Channel N-E-W.
Okay, so I want to change that. Okay, so would help if I press the right button. If I hold the blue key and press 4.
Channel details. N-E-W.
So I'm on channel details and the name is New. Okay. Now, if I hold the blue key and hit the left arrow, I can delete those letters.
T-X. 4.
Yeah, as I say, it's a little bit buggy. Okay. So I'm warning you.
Channel details. Road T-X. 4. N-E-W.
So try again. Hold the blue key. Left arrow key.
N-E.
So I've deleted the W.
N.
I've deleted the E. And now I've deleted the N. Now the number keys are also letter keys. And so 2 is ABC, 3 is DEF, 4 is GHI, 5 is JKL, 6 is MNO, 7 is PQRS, 8 is TUV, and 9 is WXYZ, and 0 is space. And so it's very much like a phone. So I'm going to change the name to Test. So I'm going to hit the 8 key twice.
T-U.
Oops,
You.
once too much. I've changed it to you. Hang on a minute. I told you it's not easy. I hit it once,
T.
so I've got T. Okay, so I've got T. Now I'm going to have to hit it twice to get E.
T. T. E. T. E.
So it pronounces the whole thing, not just the letter I'm pressing, okay, which can be very
yeah.
confusing. And so if I want an S, I've got to do it 4 times on the 7.
T. 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 E. T. E. S.
And then
Wow.
I'm going to do the T again,
T. E. T. E. S. T.
and I've got the word test. Now I can save that, okay, by holding the blue button, hitting the green, and that channel's now called test. But it's not that easy. I'd rather go into the CPS.
Yes, that's what I told the person. I said, just name it with number 1, and you get home, change it in the CPS. That's the easiest way to do it. But you know, there's, like I said before, there's guys who wants to test everything and find out what you can and can't do, and they're going to find bugs, and that's what their hobby is, finding bugs and see if he can fix it.
Yeah, sure. And Roger's not quite happy when people find bugs because he knows there are bugs. We all know there are bugs. So when you write such complex software, there are always going to be bugs. And in fact, in the new release, there's some bugs cleaned out. For example, Chris, who likes to find bugs in Canada there, said that on some of the options, when you were going through them very quickly, it would stutter. And Roger did some work on that to improve that.
Oh, great. You know, I think that could be, I thought it was possibly because of the CPU was a little underpowered and it couldn't handle the speech that fast. That's one of the things I thought.
Well, I mean, the CPU is being pushed to the limit.
Okay, Russ, you got the last question?
I got the last one. I guess we've kind of answered it in a way, but how long has Roger been working, or how long has it been involved in the Open GD77 project?
I mean, quite a long time. As I say, it started 2.5-3 years ago in reality, but it was the German guy, Kai, DG4KLU, who did most of the initial work. And by about June of last year, Roger was working in it before that, Kai had got what was called Tier 1 working. Now, Tier 1 means that you can transmit and receive DMR signals, but you can't handle time slots. So it actually worked very well with hotspots, but you couldn't use it on a repeater, because if you use a radio on a repeater that's Tier 1, it blocks time slot 1 and time slot 2. And so you were not going to be popular if you used it on a repeater. Kai left about this time, left the project for reasons that were important to Kai, and Roger took over as the chief developer, and he made this massive leap in that he managed to get the software working, or the firmware working, on Tier 2, which meant it did indeed work correctly with time slot 1 and time slot 2, and he's basically been developing the software from there. As I think from the initial start, was 2.5-3 years ago. But you have to remember, a lot of the early stuff was not actually writing firmware. It was trying to understand how the old firmware worked with the GD77.
Yeah, that's the amazing part. You were telling earlier about how they did that, where they actually connected wires to the circuit boards and the different components and run the code and figured out where they went to. That just blows my mind that someone was dedicated to a project that they would just basically destroy a radio to find out what happens when the code goes a certain direction.
I think Roger's destroyed more than one, and I know a number of his radios are covered in wires.
What does Roger do? I mean, that's almost a dumb question to say, what does he do full time? Sounds like he works on the project full time, but what is his full time occupation?
He's an IT project developer.
Okay. Well, he is gifted.
I'd use the word genius myself, but
yeah, none of us would disagree with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's all of our questions, except I think we've kind of grazed over one. Do you see any new features that we should look forward to in the future for the project that Roger may be working on, but it's not ready for release yet? You got any ideas?
Yeah, what happens is Roger produces what's called a development version, When we've all tested it thoroughly to death, then he then relabels it as the stable version. And so there are always new development versions coming along. Some have become stable versions, some don't. And what happens is, I think you all know that there's Open GD77.com where you can register for the forum, and people go onto the forum and make suggestions about things they would like to see. And many of the suggestions are very sensible and may be workable. And Roger keeps a list, basically, which, of course, this project for the blind hams was on that list. And at the beginning, of course, there were more important things to do that he thought at that time. And it sort of gradually came up the list until it got to the top. But there are other things which people are asking for. And as he has the time, he puts them in. So it's hard to say what's going to come. I will update the package every so often. But I mean, the update I did on the 27th was a very small thing really, and probably won't be used by most people. But I probably won't update the package for every new version. But if there's something significant, then I almost certainly will.
Oh, that's amazing. And we appreciate your and Gena's dedication to getting this project up and working, and explanations and tutorials of what it takes for us to get this radio working. Now, there's some question out about the GD77S. There's several of them out there. I've got two myself, and we were wondering, you know, we talked about it. Would you consider, if you ever had one in your hands, to do a tutorial on the Open 77 firmware and the CPS for the GD77S?
Yeah, I think we discussed this a little bit the other day, and you bent my arm up my back a little bit, I think. And what I said was, I think, yes, if I had a GD77S, I'd see if I could produce something for it, because indeed, as you say, there is a version for the 77S of the Open GD77. Obviously, its functionality is more restricted because it doesn't have the keypad. And also there's a version for the RD5R from Baofeng, and also the DM1801. But Gena's in the background a little bit at the moment, but I think we shouldn't forget that I would never have got to the end of this project without Gena.
Oh, no, Gena, you're still with us. We appreciate all your hard work and keeping Ian informed on the voice capabilities that the software and firmware needed before we could actually use it. And thank you very much for all your due diligence.
I think Ian underestimates the fact that he learned to touch type some years ago. He's always had an appreciation of the power of the keyboard, and when I gave him Windows shortcuts to try to accomplish something more efficiently, you know, he was able to take that on board. So he's a little bit more than an entry-level screen reader user now, and you know, is not afraid to ask, you know, how we would do something, which yeah, I think that's all credit to Ian, really, and he does free his hand quite a bit from that mouse now.
Yeah, that's good. You know, and there's questions why only one tester, and my answer would be, if we had 4 or 5 JAWS users, NVIDIA users, it would take probably a year to finish what Ian and Gena has accomplished in a short period of time. I believe that's the way it would work, don't you, Russ?
I do. I mean, I think, you know, it's a case of where you could ask a ham 5 questions, or ask 5 hams a question and you get 6 different answers. So, and I think it would be the same situation here. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I think everybody just did fine. I don't. I can't imagine it coming out any better. So.
I mean, it's true, Russ, that some blind hams were not happy that I was not using them as testers, but it was for that reason that I'd be getting, you know, half a dozen different answers, and there were hams that wanted it to definitely had to work with JAWS and nothing else, and that wasn't what I was trying to do.
No, I think you took the right approach in using narrator, because it was, you know, a situation where if it works with narrator, it'll work with the other screen readers, and so yeah, that was the right approach. Again, you'll always have those dissenters out there, so I would not let that deter you. So Okay, well, good deal. It was a great interview. I think everything went well. And hopefully we have enough backups to, in case something did fail. But we really appreciate both of you being here. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, we'll if we have another major update, or if you do, if one of our great listeners would love to send you either a GD77S or have one mailed to you from Amazon, I think Ian's open to all of those possibilities. So if I got back to work, I would send him one, or at least order one and have it delivered to him. So anybody that's curious about the GD77S, there we go.
I just don't want a mail van to turn up with 100 GD77Ss.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you might want to contact Ian first to see if he's got one yet.
Keep your address secret.
Probably a good idea, Russ.
Yeah, email him and see if he's got one. If he doesn't have one and you're willing to ship him one or have Amazon deliver one to his door, go for it, because we could really use the tutorials. They're so great. It's amazing.
As I said, they did a great job of answering questions, and I hope they didn't feel like they were being interrogated, but I think it was very informative. So good job, guys.
Well, thanks very much, and it's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, Gena, you're back roboting again. I think that's a word. So we'll end the show at this time and thank everybody for joining CQ Blind Hands Roundtable.